Can you hear me? Yes, good. Yeah? Okay, I probably will get louder as I go, not because I have anything, controversial to speak about, certainly. But I get warmed up. So thank you very much, Barry, for inviting me back. This is my second or possibly even third visit to the Open Classroom. So much so, I get so inspired by what Barry has done over these past many years with Governor Dukakis and Chris Basso and all of you who've come to so many of the Open Classrooms that I'm going to hold my own in the fall as well. So I won't use this as a commercial break, but if you're interested later.
Please, would you give us a minute?
Okay. All right. All right, it's going to be our second Open Classroom, and it's on Tuesday nights, same time, same place, but same time as in 6 o'clock. We received an award from the Social Science Research Council that we call America's Engagement with the Muslim World. And so we're going to have, again, a similar format where we'll have at least 2 speakers per night, and in an open classroom format, open to all of you and to the public. And we're going to look at Muslim societies, especially those in the Middle East. As you know, not all Muslim states are in the Middle East, and not all states in the Middle East are Muslim societies. So we're doing a little Venn diagram where they actually overlap. We'll include Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, and then we're going to get outside the Middle East, move over a little bit to Pakistan and Afghanistan, because I don't know if you've paid attention to those things lately, but those are still relevant. We'll bring in journalists and public policy analysts, and we'll, again, just have an open discussion about how we have engaged with the Middle East, and I use that in a very generic sense because we haven't engaged all that well sometimes, and we have engaged all that well at other times. So we'll leave it open. So we'll talk more about that right here. Tuesday nights, the night before. So you'll be busy Tuesday and Wednesdays. So book them now.
Bring blankets, pillows.
Yes. Got lots of space down here. Have sit-ins and sleep-ins and anything we want. So it's a pleasure to share the stage, as I have many times with Larry Lowenthal, to talk about two, as Barry says, 2 very distinct places. I would like to take a broad, kind of a forest approach, and then look at one really, really big tree, that of Egypt, and then throw out some statistics at the very end and turn it over to Larry to talk about Israel. So I'll do that. And as long as all of these mics work and you're all fine, I'll continue. I want to broaden the concept of security from national security to human security as well. And I'll talk about some of those elements in this talk. But focusing on the demographic issues, in particular population, but there are, as we know, so many other issues related to demography, race and ethnicity and others. But let's think about the Arab world. First I'll give you this visual. Keep this in your mind, and I'll go back to the text. So that's what we often call the Arab world. So it stretches across 5,000 miles, nearly twice the distance between New York and San Francisco, from Morocco to the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula. It covers an area of over 5 million square miles. By comparison, the United States is about 3.6 million square miles. With 72% of its territory in Africa, again, look at North Africa, 72% of the territory in Africa and 28% in Asia, the Arab world straddles 2 continents, a position that has made it one of the world's most strategic regions. And when we get to Egypt, we will see that Egypt is in fact at crossroads, the Suez Canal and the land bridge between North Africa and Asia. Again, from Atlantic to the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Aden, Red Sea, Indian Ocean. The population of that land expanse is approximately 340 million people, about 5% of the world's population, and one country, Egypt, is 25% of the Arab world, with 85 million people. Now, roughly 10% of those 85 million people are Coptic Christian. So if you take 8 million, so you've got almost 80 million of the 85 million, or like 78 million, let's say, are Sunni Muslim. There's not a big divide between Sunni and Shia. In Egypt, it's Sunni Muslim. Maybe 1% of the Muslim population in Egypt is Shia, maybe. It's primarily Sunni Arab, as I say, with about 10% being Coptic Christian. The original Egyptians, they will say. The projections for the population density of the Arab world are closing in on 400 million people within just the next 4 or 5 years. So an increase of nearly 60 million more Arabs across that expanse. They say in Egypt that every 9 months there's another 1 million Egyptians. Every 9 months. Now, of the focus that I would like to talk about a bit tonight is the youth population, the youth bulge, some people call it. The bottom line of these statistics is that over 60% or so of the Arab world are under 25 years of age. Now, as I mentioned, I want to talk about human and national security and human and national insecurities as well. There's a report that comes out every few years by the Arab Human Development subgroup of the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. And this group of Arabs from across the Arab world, intellectuals, public policy analysts, government officials, and others, this group of Arabs representing much of that diversity of the Arab world, put together these reports, and they're very critical of Arab governments, they're very critical of Arab societies, they're very critical of the state of Arabs as they see it. And they've taken a lot of heat over the last 10 years for their reports that come out and basically say, you know, talk about all of the ills that are befalling the Arab peoples, including the political the responsibility of politicians and political leaders for those same ills. So the most recent one is from 2009, and I'm not going to talk about all of these points, but you will have the PowerPoint. It'll be up on the website, so you'll be able to go through this yourself, and I have links here so you can find this report. But among the many things they talk about that are problems of insecurity for Arabs are violence against women and children, occupation, wars and refugees, human trafficking, the dependence on oil as a problem, healthcare, mortality, life expectancy, water scarcity, climate change, the state, the problems with the states as they are conceived. And again, this is 2009. They didn't have the foresight that we now have. Well, ours is now hindsight, but looking at the state of the Arab world today, they have been for nearly a decade pointing out the ills that politicians have a huge share of responsibility for. Poverty, illiteracy, etc., brain drain and emigration. So if you go to this report, you'll be able to see both an executive summary of all of these as well as the details, should you care to see these. One of them, this is the link to the actual number. You can see at the end of this long URL, you'll see AHDR numbers. Okay, so these are some of the statistics. I just put it under that first subtopic of violence against women and children. But let's talk a little bit about occupation and war, since we have some responsibility for that ourselves. The U.S. invasion of Iraq has led to a couple million or more refugees and a whole bunch of other ills for the Iraqi people, including tens, if not over 100,000 dead at our hands or at the hands of the violence that has been caused by us and through us and with us as we continue that war. This is nothing about the $3 trillion that it has cost the United States, by the way. That's a different story. we can talk about that later if you'd like. The other real occupation that has been gnawing at the Arab world, especially since 1967, but you could go back obviously to 1948 when Israel was created. We'll talk about that. But Israel's occupation of the West Bank and the settlers as well, I'll go over some of those numbers in a little bit. Plus, even though Israel does not occupy Gaza, it still surrounds Gaza, and with the help of Egypt, they control Gaza. They control the ins and outs and people flow and goods and everything else. So in effect, there's still an occupation of the Gaza Strip. The Arab winter of discontent that we're in now, people are trying to call it different things. The Arab Spring, well, it happened in winter. Okay, Arab winter of discontent. The Arab flowering, so we don't really have like the Velvet Revolution yet, or the Jasmine Revolution. We don't have anything that's catchy, but you know the story, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, from Tunisia to Egypt and Bahrain and Libya, etc. So we'll talk about that. But in this set of ills that befall the Arab world, we do have over 4.5 million Palestinians who are refugees. We have 2.5 million Iraqi refugees in Jordan, Syria, Iran, Egypt, Lebanon. We have about 17 million people from the Arab world that are forced refugees, whether it's the Sudan and Darfur, or Iraq, or Somalia, or Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, etc. Plus the ones I've just mentioned. So, again, just as we could do this for our own country, there's a lot of ills befalling our societies as well. So the Arab world certainly is, we can reach across all of these different ponds and continents and say, yeah, we're suffering from problems with rising costs of healthcare, and they really have inadequate systems. I mean, we are one of the models of the world, in terms of especially where we are in Boston. But one of the serious problems, again, that affect instability is the horrible conditions for healthcare systems, facilities, low government expenditures on health. We have, and again, this is a jumble of ills, as you see. I'm painting a really sadly bleak picture, but we can talk about the good things as well. But in terms of the instability, these are the leading causes of that. The hunger situation, there are pockets of malnutrition, there are certainly food insecurities. Again, we're talking about 340 million people, 22 different countries. It's very hard to generalize, and what I'm doing is taking my lead, or taking my information really from the leadership of the Arab Human Development Report itself. But let's talk about the state as well. You can tell I'm a political scientist. I focus on all, the wars, the occupations, the state, the ills. Martial law and emergency rule, you've probably heard about this if you've been watching the situation that's been going on in Egypt or Libya or Bahrain or others. These are things that Arabs have lived with for decades, whether it's Syria or Egypt or Yemen. Martial law, emergency rule, authoritarian governments. This is the norm. This is the Arab world we know for decades. Anti-terrorism. The United States learned quite a bit from our Arab friends and our Arab enemies. After 9/11, we started cherry picking, like some of the techniques, or if we didn't feel we could do those techniques against terrorism, we knew we could do rendition and send them over to Syria, send them over to Egypt, let them torture the bad guys. These guys have been doing it for decades. Anti-terrorism, sweeping powers accumulated in the hands of military governments or dictators or monarchs, but again, all of those elements that are the Arab state, which again, universally so, are authoritarian regimes. And all the ills that torture and unlawful detentions and the rampant the use of the death penalty in increasing numbers. Bottom line, absolute authority among all Arab heads of state, and they answer to no one, according to the Arab Human Development Report writers. These are the things also, I'm going to move to a little bit of a discussion of some of the economic issues. The poverty rates are low in some countries, relatively low anyway. 30% isn't low to Americans, but to the Arabs, I'd rather be in Lebanon than in Yemen if I'm worried about my poverty. Egypt, they say, is around 41%. I've been following this, as what Barry might have mentioned. I've been following Egypt for years, living there and doing my research there, and it's been as high as 50, 55%. Now it's around 40%. The estimated number of Arabs, and again, remember 340 million Arabs we're talking about, 65 million of them living in poverty is the estimate of this group. Undernourishment is rising, or has risen since the 1990s. Unemployment is certainly rising, and this is an astounding figure. 1/3 of the region lives on less than $2 a day. I mean, that's certainly the poverty level. So some of these statistics might seem contradictory, because if there are 340 million people, well, now you're talking about over 100 million people living in poverty. If poverty is living on less than $2, it used to be living on less than $1 a day, and I think they've adjusted that number up. But at any rate, it's a bleak picture. Now, oil is also a bleak picture, believe it or not. You know, oil, we think of all these rich Saudis and Kuwaitis and others who gather up all of these billions and billions of dollars with our help, sending them overseas. But the reality is that, you know, most of the oil-rich states have the smallest populations, and so the larger countries like Egypt, which has very little oil, or Syria, or Algeria has natural gas, but not, you know, the wealth doesn't necessarily follow the populations, and so you also have dependence on oil, leading to what I call this, you know, tale of two cities, the second bullet point, where it is the best of times for those who are producing and selling the oil, and the worst of times for the people who continue to live in poverty, but also have to pay for increased amounts, the rising cost of oil. So even the non-oil countries in the Arab world are incurring higher and higher import bills and fuels, and they still need to subsidize fuel. The government will try to subsidize fuel, transportation, as well as housing and food. So now you've got these corrupt, I didn't say that word yet, but now I will, the corrupt authoritarian governments who also have been worried about the stability of their regimes, basically thinking they can just buy off the populations with subsidies, subsidizing food, jobs, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't mean these are high-quality jobs or high-quality education or high-quality healthcare or high-quality housing or transportation or whatever. But you can see we're coming to, well, we've reached and surpassed the boiling point, but you can see now how these things have been building up over time, I think. There's just some miscellaneous data I put together in another slide about GDP. You know, we can compare all the Arab countries. They still have less GDP than Spain. There's a high illiteracy rate and jobs. We need a lot of jobs. As the population grows, you need, they say, around 6 million new jobs need to be created every year just to keep up with the new entrants to the labor force. Again, I'm going to be sharing this data, this PowerPoint with you. You can go through these. I just picked 5 countries: Egypt, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, and Palestine. You can go through these links, and you can see a whole assortment of data about urbanization, about male-female numbers, about poverty levels, etc. I want to, this is, forgive me, I just discovered this quote late this afternoon, and I had to put it in. We'll read it together, but it's something that a friend of mine in Beirut sent me. He thought I would like it. It's a recent Gallup poll, and it says, if Tunisia's revolt provided the trigger for Egypt's uprising, the gap between what Egyptians expected and what they experienced provided the fuel. In other words, there's the rising expectations, even with all of these problems of poverty. For instance, Egypt has been doing fine recently in economic terms, in terms of macroeconomic growth. It's just in 2010, it had a low rate of only 5%. Throughout, from the beginning of the 2000s, they've actually been doing quite well, again, relatively speaking, at 6 to 7% growth rate in GDP. That's been pretty good. Now we all know where it's gone, however, $60–70 billion in the hands of just one family, the ruling family, the Mubaraks. Plus you can see these other ministers who have 40 billion here or 20 billion there. So there's been a lot of growth, however that certainly has not been spread around the country. So this has left many more Egyptians with diminishing perceived access to the prosperity. So they see the wealth coming in, but at the same time they're more pessimistic about their lives. So Egyptians boasted the highest democratic aspirations of the region, but among the lowest in actual practice. While many might have tolerated a paternal state-citizen social contract, what I was just mentioning before, where people accept less freedom in exchange for high-quality state-provided social services, Egyptians had neither one. As Egyptian satisfaction with their personal freedom decreased, so did their contentment with state-provided necessities. So this twin decline in attitudes suggests that in the eyes of many Egyptians, the old regime had resembled more of a prison warden than a generous, if overprotective, father. So I know we all like videos, and this is a great video, but it's a little long, so I'm just going to leave it here and leave it as a teaser for you. And if we have time at the end, we could end with a video as well. It's a nice video about youth in the revolution. So if we have time, we can watch that. But let's talk then about where did the Egyptian revolution, if we can still call it that, where did it come from? I've laid out a really an array of bad circumstances and situations across the Arab world. And sadly, now I have to focus on Egypt and their own particular bad situations. We know Mubarak was a dictator for 30 years. That's not the only reason he was overthrown, but you can be sure that that was one of the main reasons he was overthrown. Some of the political reasons we can point to, or the political factors as to why now. Why did the Egyptians revolt now? We know about Tunisia, and we'll get to that in a moment again. But there was also the fact that, okay, 30 years a dictator. The most recent parliamentary elections in the fall of 2010, just 2–3 months before the January Revolution, there was a parliamentary election that was stolen, basically out from under the Egyptian people. Most every election that the Mubarak regime has held has been a stolen election, but this one was more blatant than normal. There have been increased labor unrest and labor movements seeking recognition of labor rights for many years, and these have been increasing over the last 5–6 years. In particular, a movement called the April 6th movement. April 6th is, again, a youth-led, and when I say youth in this case, I mean primarily 35 and under. I have a different definition for this group because I just happen to know some of the leaders of the movement. They have been advocating on Facebook and in demonstrations for better rights for workers, including the right to demonstrate and protest. In 2005, there was also a movement called Kifaya. Mubarak was up for re-election in 2005, just as he was supposed to be up for re-election this year in 2011. And in 2005, people had had it. So they formed an organization called Kifaya, which means enough. So people would wear these yellow buttons with one word in Arabic, Kifaya, and everybody knew what it meant. It's like, enough of Mubarak. So that was 2005, so 6 years before this revolution even happened. You've heard of Mohammed Baradei, perhaps? Mohammed al-Baradei, who was the head of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and who often butted heads with George Bush before George Bush launched this ridiculous war in Iraq. He would say, no, we have inspections and we have inspectors and we haven't found anything, give us more time. So he came to fame, international acclaim, won the Nobel Peace Prize, went back to Egypt last year and said, I'll run for president if I think I have a fighting chance. Not I'll run for president if I can win. I'll run for president if I think the system will change enough to allow free and fair and open elections. So he has become a factor for the last year. Now he himself is not this charismatic Nasser-like or Mitt Romney-like, depending on who you're siding with. He does not have that charismatic. I don't know. Okay, maybe Mitt doesn't have the charisma either. But anyway, you get my point. He's not this overly Ronald Reagan. Sorry, how could I forget him? He's not Ronald Reagan, nor is he Gamal Abdel Nasser. But he's a force to be reckoned with. So this also has led to people saying, okay, maybe there's chance for reform of the system. And then you had the fact that Egyptians were looking to the September 2000 elections for president. And this was like, okay, we had kifaya, we had enough 6 years ago. Don't we really have enough now? And then the Tunisia spark happened. If you don't remember the Tunisia spark, it is when around December 17th, a poor Tunisian lit himself on fire out of complete frustration over the corruption of his government, the lack of opportunities for him as a small, very small micro enterprise businessman, and he felt he couldn't provide for his family, and he had it. He didn't know what else to do, and he self-immolated. He set himself on fire. That spark led to the Tunisian rebellion and revolution, and that spark also started coming to Egypt. My wife and I were in Egypt at this time, and we left the country on January 20th, and we heard about this day of rage or this day of anger or a demonstration that was going to occur on January 25th, and we thought, yeah, another one of those. 75,000 people signed up on Facebook. Like, wow, that's impressive. I'd be surprised, I'd be shocked if 7,500 people showed up in Tahrir Square. And then you guys know the rest of the story, don't you? And so do we. So from that day onward, we had these very we had this growing peaceful demonstrations. We had the violent aspects of the demonstrations. We had the army moving in. We had the demonstrators praying, and the rest of us watching TV, watching our loved ones via CNN or Al Jazeera online or whatever we could watch, hoping that the army wouldn't do Tiananmen Square. And you had the demonstrators hoping as well and coming up with a plan of hugging a soldier. And thankfully the army stayed neutral. We could talk about how that might have changed in recent days, but at this time, again, I'm just going through the days of what transpired. Ultimately, I call this the Empire Strikes Back, when the camels came in and the horses and the Molotov cocktails and the ugly aspects of the regime sought to maintain the regime as best they could. Then you had, also within this time, Egypt is still overboiling, it's still protesting, but now you have it spreading. It went from Tunisia to Egypt. Well, now it's in Yemen and Jordan and Syria and soon Libya and Bahrain and elsewhere. And then finally, you have Mubarak resigning on February 11th. I took this picture on February 25th, so I got on a plane as soon as I could after Mubarak resigned. And this was, Tahrir Square went from being this symbol of protest and this area of protest to an area of celebration. And since this time, it's back and forth between celebration and protest and celebration and protest. It was really a carnival atmosphere in Tahrir, and it remains the nationalism and the pride of Egyptians after Mubarak's departure, after they overthrew him. is something I've never experienced. The whole country has come out and lifted its head. I mean, even the sayings they have, you know, lift your head high, you are Egyptian, things like that. And the kids have it, and everyone has been caught up in that pride and that nationalism. It's not Islamism, or at least it hasn't been. It was unity, symbols of Christians and Muslims working together to overthrow the despot. But we also see these are Egyptian flags held by Palestinians. So these are flags being waved by Palestinians in Ramallah in solidarity with the Egyptians. So the spirit of the revolution, it's kind of taken on the, well, let's do what Egypt did. I mean, people almost forget about Tunisia, but please don't forget about Tunisia. Tunisia started it, Egypt continued it. Libya, of course, has gone a very different, ugly route, so we can talk about that as well. Bahrain, Yemen, Syria, etc., etc. So I'm going to move to turn this over to Larry. I just want to throw up some statistics. These are, and when we deal with, you know, Israel and Palestine, it's always tough to figure out, you know, where do you get your most unbiased statistics? Of course, the CIA. So I went to the CIA fact book, and I'll use their numbers. So if we see Israel as having let's say 7.5 million people, over 76% of them being Jewish, 20+% being Arab and other, but they basically say 20 to 22% of Israel are Palestinian Israelis, or what the Israelis call Arab Israelis. And then you can break it down actually by religion as well as ethnicity. And let's not forget the settlers, about 500,000 in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, plus nearly 20,000 in the Golan Heights. Look at Palestine for a second, and by Palestine I mean West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, or Arab East Jerusalem. And we see roughly 4 million Palestinians. Now, I mentioned these growth rates. Perhaps Larry will help us with the Israeli growth rate figures here. But if you combine these, you look at between the Mediterranean and the Jordan Valley, the place we call Israel or Israel-Palestine today, you have this kind of demographic reality. Okay? I think I'm going to leave it there and turn it to Larry, and we can turn the lights up if you like, Larry, and you're not using this, right? Okay.